All right, hey y'all, Carolina Weather Group here. We have a really special interview. Actually, our first in-person interview, and we're doing that with no other than Eric Thomas, Chief Meteorologist at WBTV. 33 years, Eric.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Yeah.
And at the end of 2021, you're going to be hanging up the old weather jackets. So.
Yeah, what I tell people is that I'm not running away from this as much as I'm running toward, other things I still really want to do. And I'm really, really blessed. I just turned 60, and I'm just extremely blessed that I have the opportunity to do it, at this age, while I'm still young enough to get out, see the country, maybe see the world, but I want to take things one step at a time. There's so much of this country that I haven't seen. And we'll probably get into this a little bit more, but I really want to explore my love of photography and video and photojournalism, if you will, filmmaking. Right. And yes, weather will be a big part of that. I love weather. I hope I do after this amount of time. But I would like to get out and, not necessarily chase tornadoes, but if the timing was right, maybe do some of that. But I would love to get out and do some lightning photography, aerial photography, things like that. Spend more time with my wife. My 92-year-old mother here is in Charlotte as well. So would like to certainly take advantage of some time with her as well.
So what was it like, Eric, making this decision? I know, big relief or like, oh man, I wish we'll get more into the career, but sure. Just your immediate reaction of saying, you know what, I think I'm ready to kick back a little bit.
Yeah, this is something that I had been given a lot of thought toward over about the last 3 to 4 years. And we weren't quite ready, say 3 years ago, 2 years ago. My wife was definitely not ready. She wasn't sure if she wanted me home yet underfoot. So it was sort of a partnership in terms of how we came to this decision. We wanted to make sure the finances, were where they needed to be as well. And finally, everything just kind of came together, over this last year. And my wife got to a point where she was comfortable, and I've been comfortable with it. I've been really anxious to kind of spread the wings, if you will. Yeah. And having said that, that's none of that is to say that, I disliked my job, and as you say, we'll get into that more. But it was just one of those things where, you look at the clock and you realize I'm 60 years old. I just had my first grandchild who was born literally like 3 weeks ago. And so knowing that earlier this year as well was sort of another chapter in this decision, that the time just seemed like it was just the right time.
Yeah. Yeah. So talking about your retirement, I've got to tell for those folks who have probably watched, have heard my weather story, but if you're not, this man right here actually was the person who got me interested into weather. And so take you back to when I was in third grade. My mom was director of our PTA or PTO. Some schools, it's different ways, but actually invited Eric to come speak at my school. And Eric, I can't remember, something happened and you wasn't able to, but you called my house, left a voice message on my answer machine, say, hey, can't make it, but would love to invite you and your family down. So we got in contact with you and got to do the whole studio tour, and you took me to the Weather Center, which is a little different than it is today. Mm-hmm. But you really just kicked me into that direction. Like I already had that interest. My grandpa and I would always talk about weather, but it was you who kind of just really pushed me over the line, and I said, this is what I want to do. So with that, we went to eat dinner down the road here at the Open Kitchen. And so you gave me a stack of weather charts, and I was going to bring them today, but I couldn't find the box in my basement, so I'm going to have to look for them. And hopefully before I can get them back to you. But it was just really cool. And so this is a special interview for me because you're the guy that got me into weather. So I appreciate all you've done in the Carolinas and for me personally, and I know you're going to be missed greatly in the Carolinas. Everyone knows Eric Thomas and just such a great representative of our area. And so for everyone, we appreciate your service to the area.
Yeah. Well, Scotty, thanks a million. I mean, we've all had people who have helped us get to where we are. And if I had a small fraction of that in your growth and development, I couldn't be happier. But it's funny you mentioned the weather chart. I'd have to dig around, but I think I still have it. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I think I still have a weather chart from a TV station visit, much like yours, back in the early 70s. From Bob Kudzma up in Pittsburgh, and it's a DIFAX chart, which I know most people may not know what that is, but it's a weather chart, and it's crumbling now because it's so old. Right. But he signed it for me, and I never threw that one away either.
Yeah, that was. I remember it was it was in March, Final Four. You guys always do the college basketball, so you signed it. Delano Little, Paul Cameron was still here, so I do have that that I've kept. So really cool to look back on. But you're talking about your career.
Yeah.
How did you get started? How did you get your interest in weather? And talk a little bit about that, and going to school at Penn State.
Yep.
One of the best meteorology programs, if not the best, in the nation. Yep. So let's learn a little bit about the younger Eric Thomas.
All right. So this might surprise you, but I actually grew up unwavering. I was going to be a pilot, pure and simple. And as I got older, we were under like the final approach of the Pittsburgh International Airport. So even as a 3-year-old toddler, I was looking up at this guy going, guy, loved airplanes. And so as I got older, I never changed that dream. And I was determined, to go to school and get my, my flight certificate and become a commercial airline pilot. And as I was a junior in high school, my dad, sat me down. He said, okay, let's get serious now. What do you want to do? I said, I'm serious. I want to be a pilot. He says, okay, how do you plan to approach that? And I said, well, I'll go to, Embry-Riddle, which is a civilian flight school in Florida, or Florida Institute of Technology, or one of these, flight schools. I'm going to go learn to fly. And my dad said, I don't know if that's a really, really good idea. He says, because what if you go through 4 years of flight school and you get your certificate and your commercial rating and all of this kind of stuff, and then you develop eye condition. Or you develop perhaps a heart murmur or something, and they won't let you fly anymore. He said, you're going to have a worthless piece of paper. You're going to have this certificate, degree, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to be sunk. And I said, oh, well, yeah, I see your point. He goes, why don't you do this? Why don't you go to college and get an actual degree in something, and then go into the military and get your flight training? And I thought, well, okay, that's a good idea. And so then I did a little bit of research, and I thought, okay, what field of study will give me the best chance to be accepted as a pilot in the military? And through my research, I discovered there were 2 really favorable degrees, aeronautical engineering and meteorology, which makes sense. You're up there flying around in the weather, And so I thought, wow, I really, really like weather. This is perfect. I'll study meteorology. And then, of course, the next question was, well, what schools around here, offer degree programs in meteorology? Well, as you pointed out, it turned out to be Penn State, which is 3 hours up the road. So Penn State was just my choice because it was convenient. As you mentioned, it's a great school. And so, so in 78, off to Penn State I went. In 82, 4 years later, I got my degree. And so now here's where the story gets twisted and turned, because everything was working out perfectly. So I got my degree and I went to aviation officer candidate school. I had a class date of October of 82 for naval flight training. Basically, you got to go through boot camp and everything. And I got down there, and the first 2 weeks are all the orientation physicals. Well, wouldn't you know it, I failed the physical because, and I guess this is on TV so people can kind of see here a little bit, but I had a defective eustachian tube, which is a sinus tube. So it wasn't like one of these deals where my eyes were bad or I had a funky heart or anything, but when they put you through this pressure chamber where they're simulating rapid pressure changes as you're going up and down in an airplane, a cockpit of a fighter jet, when you're coming down through the atmosphere, you have to blow through your nose like scuba divers. It's called Valsalva, and pop your ears like this, And well, my right ear was popping, which was good. My left ear was not popping, and so the pressure just kept pushing harder and harder and harder on my eardrum. And I was supposed to raise my hand when I wasn't feeling comfort, discomfort, and I didn't because I didn't want to fail. So I just put up with this pain, and finally a blood vessel broke in my eardrum, and so the whole thing blew up, and I was screaming like a baby, and they came in and they settled me down and all of this kind of stuff, and they basically sent me up to the flight surgeon at which point she determined, it was a female, and she determined that I had this defective eustachian tube.
Wow.
And there was just nothing that they could do for me. And then, boom, she said, thanks for your interest in the United States Navy. Here's your ticket back home to Pittsburgh. Good luck. Have a nice life.
Wow.
And my 21-year-old dream blew up. And so at this point now, I'm figuring out, okay, I've got a degree in meteorology. What on earth am I going to do? Because I hadn't given it much thought. I was going to be a pilot. And so more twists and turns. And I know we don't have 2 hours here, but I without getting into it too much, unless you really want to drill down, and you're fine if you do. But for the benefit of the program here, I'll just jump ahead and I'll just say that I ended up getting an internship at a small TV station outside of Pittsburgh in Steubenville, Ohio, and they gave me a shot to go on the air, and I did okay, and so I was there from the first half of 1984 through June, and then in June of '84 I got my second job at another small station in North Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana, and I worked there from '84 to '88, at which point then I got my opportunity to come back to Charlotte, and I came back here in '88 as the weekend meteorologist, and then in 1990 I went from Monday through Friday morning and noon, and then in 1993 I went to the weeknight slot, and so you've been seeing me for 28 years now, on Monday through Friday weeknights. Right. Yeah.
Talking about WBTV, being here in Charlotte, what drew you to Charlotte? And you have a unique unique perspective of being the first certified meteorologist in the city of Charlotte, which in the 80s, not mistaken, Charlotte's starting to really grow, and it's a big market. So crazy to know that you're
yeah.
You would thought someone before you had been certified.
I would have. Charlotte is a big market. It was a big market then. It's a much bigger market even now. So I'll start with your first question. What drew me back to Charlotte? Well, it was an opportunity of a lifetime. We used to vacation down here in North Carolina, on the coast, admittedly, from Pittsburgh. But North Carolina was already kind of close to my heart, just because I think of North Carolina as like the best time of my life. It was vacation, and I knew Charlotte was a big market, and that's part of the goal, really. If you want to be able to raise a family, send kids to college, the bigger the market, the better the paycheck, quite bluntly.
Right.
And so we all kind of wanted to get to bigger markets. And I knew Charlotte was just this up and coming market. I mean, it was a city that was just basically hitting its stride, and when we got here in '88, we got here the same year the Charlotte Hornets were starting up. And it was just pure excitement. The city was just alive, and it was a good place for us because my hometown was Pittsburgh. Vicky, my wife's hometown, was in Louisiana. That's where I met my wife when I was down there. So we were kind of halfway in between our two homes. And then everything else. I mean, you've got the mountains 90 minutes to the west of us. You have the beaches 3 hours to the east. And I told Vicky, I said, if I'm allowed to grow here at WBTV, this is where I want to retire. And I'm retiring here. So God gave me, all these blessings. And the beauty of not having to move around is that, you don't have to move your kids around. I never had to move as a kid. I grew up in one spot my entire childhood, never had to make new friends. And I thought, if I can do that for my children, right, and not move them around the country, that's what I want to do for them.
Which in this industry, that's a big thing, especially starting off young. You're moving every 2 or 3 years. So to know that this is your third station, and here you've been for the rest of the career. So let's talk about this little fun question. I guess people may want to. Where was your vacation spot here in the Carolinas?
Oh, it was Nags Head.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Nags Head. In fact, we went back there just a few years ago, and I was looking for the little pink cottage that we used to stay down there, and it's not there anymore. As you know, everywhere is growing up now so fast. But I basically knew about where the spot was because we were. I don't know if you're familiar with Nags Head, but the sand dunes.
Yes.
Yeah. So our little pink cottage was right across from the sand dunes. There, not far from Kitty Hawk. And so it was just so great to go back and kind of have those flashbacks, and relive some of those memories.
Yeah, great place to visit and even to live there. I mean, that'd be a great place. Except hurricane season, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so true.
Speaking of hurricanes, you got here.
Yeah.
We were talking. First big assignment was a big tornado in the Raleigh area, followed by what I believe a lot of people in the Carolinas will determine the benchmark storm.
Yeah.
Hurricane Hugo.
Of course. Yeah.
I guess you're maybe here a year, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I felt helpless in many respects, and I'm going to explain that. So I got here in September of '88, and in November of '88, we had a devastating F4 tornado that went through the Raleigh area. And remember, I just came up here from a teeny tiny little TV market. And so I was a little bit overwhelmed as it was, seeing the big city. I mean, I grew up in a big city, but I mean, big market television. You're flying around in helicopters now and all of this kind of stuff. And they're like, Eric, you're getting on the helicopter. We're flying you up to Raleigh, and we want you to do a live report, and an analysis of this tornado, this F4 tornado. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I in over my head, at this point? I mean, it's just intimidating, doing that kind of television, but it went fine. And then as you pointed out, 12 months later, less than that, here comes Hurricane Hugo. Now, I said I felt helpless, and here's why. The first two teeny tiny stations I was in had a full-blown weather department. So we had all of the weather charts, and we were able to do all of our own analysis and all of this. Well, as you pointed out, I got here as the first degreed meteorologist to ever work in Charlotte television, which was unbelievable if you think about it, in 1988. And because there was no meteorologist that preceded me at WBTV, we didn't have any of the analytical equipment here. So basically all we had for about the first year or two that I was here was just two little 8x10 sheets of paper that came off a fax machine that was sent to us from AccuWeather. Wow. And all I'm looking at are these little surface maps that show the little cold front, the little warm front, and the high pressure and the low pressure systems. And then we would get like a phone briefing, from AccuWeather. Now, to their credit, they did a good job, tracking this hurricane coming, into Charleston, South Carolina. But it was still a very helpless feeling because you've got this massive hurricane coming into the Carolinas. It's becoming more and more apparent that this thing is not going to just curve up the coast, and it's going to come crashing on up, the I-26 corridor and right into Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And I don't have anything to look at. I'm flying blind here, and I'm trying to do the best job I can to describe something I can't see, really, And of course, back then too, in the 80s, we didn't have nearly the radar that we have today or the satellite imagery that we have. So, we were really, working with two hands tied behind our back, but we did the best we could to get through it. And then overall, I thought the forecast was pretty good. I mean, nobody could have predicted that it would have been this devastating, this far inland. And that, of course, brings me to part two of the question, which is like, how did you process this whole storm? And really, to me, the bigger part of that was when that sun came up the next morning. And you're looking around and seeing just mass devastation everywhere. I mean, when I drove down the hill from my TV station and I'm seeing National Guardsmen in the intersection with M16 machine guns, directing traffic, that is sobering, and you realize this is bad. This is really, really bad. And I mean, but we all came through it. Everybody pulled together, as you know. Neighbors helping neighbors, grilling out on the back decks, waiting for the power to come on 3 weeks later in some cases. And the sounds of those chainsaws, that you're hearing either nearby or in the distance for days and days and days on end. Something I'll never forget.
So what was it like, Eric? Let's say 2 weeks after that, things kind of starting to calm down. You're like, oh my gosh, do I want to do this? I mean, one of the biggest devastating storms.
Yeah. I mean, part of it was, you feel helpless because of the lack of, equipment that we had at that point. But part of it was exhilarating too, because you really feel like, wow, people are really depending on me. They're depending on us. And what an opportunity, what a privilege it is to be able to serve your community in such a visceral way, where you're on the front lines, kind of like, if you will, where the bullets are flying. And it just felt, in that regard, like, wow, this is just an awesome responsibility. And how lucky I am that people are trusting me, both my employer trusting me, but also the community, putting their trust in me to guide them through, these kinds of events, these kinds of situations. So, overall, it probably did a lot for my confidence going forward. Like if I can handle this, I can handle just about anything.
Was you the news director's ear saying we've got to get better equipment? We've got to get
better. Oh yeah. That accelerated that for sure. And it wasn't long where we had a fully, operational, meteorological weather center down there. And it's been that way ever since. And so it's been a very good fit, for me, and a good setup here. Yeah.
So Eric, recapping Hugo, we've seen a lot in the weather. Could you imagine forecasting today's hurricanes with that technology? So I guess the question is, how has this enterprise, how has everything shifted from the 80s when you started to 2021 now?
Well, as you pointed out, the technology's gotten a lot better. And the model data that we rely on have gotten a lot better. There's a lot more models that we get to look at now. Sometimes, back then when we didn't have all these supercomputers, that were basically charting up all these forecasts for us, if you will, you really felt like a forecaster back then. Now, I still have as much knowledge, probably more than I did back then, but we have so many models to look at now. Sometimes I feel like I'm more like a referee than I am a forecaster. Whereas we have all this data to pour over now, and it's more or less up to us to decide, which model do we believe, which model initialized the best, which model has the best track record in the area. We understand what the biases are of the various models, and that helps us to then decide which solution we're going to lean on or lean toward when we do make the final call. So we have a ton more data. On the other hand, we have a lot less time, to really analyze the data. So it was kind of a trade-off because we have a lot more data coming in, we have better data coming in, but then we have less time to look at it. And what do I mean by less time? Well, back in the 80s, in the 90s, we had two newscasts in an 8-hour shift. We had a 6 o'clock news, we had 11 o'clock news. Well, then over time, they kept adding more and more newscasts. Right now, our lineup of news right now, and I'm going to break this out in half-hour segments. Yeah. Some newscasts are billed as hour-long, but basically they're half-hour segments, at least in terms of weather. Mm-hmm. So right now, our lineup is a 4 o'clock news, a 4:30, a 5, a 5:30, a 6, a 7, a 7:30, and an 11. And we used to have a 10, and we used to have an hour-long 8. Who knows? Maybe those will come back one day. But we're on the air for 75% of our shift now, and on top of all these newscasts that we have to do, we have social media responsibilities. We're having to keep up with Facebook pages. We're having to keep up with our station's website. We're having to keep up with the WBTV weather app. So there's all these other digital products that we're having to update at this point as well. There's these streaming services that are coming out now. We're going to be required to do more on those, with like Roku and Amazon and all these, things. And so it's changed from the standpoint of where in the early days, my job was probably 80% meteorology and 20% broadcasting, and it's probably flipped now. Wow. Yeah, it's probably 20% meteorology and 80% just cranking out shows, or cranking out social media. And so, in that regard, as somebody who's like a dyed-in-the-wool, red-blooded meteorologist, it's not what I signed up for, to be very honest, back 30, 35 years ago. And so, that was a component as to, like, how much longer do I want to keep doing this? Right. Yeah.
And with that, you are always being observed by consultants and who may not be weather savvy.
Right.
They may not know all of this, and they're trying to tell you this is how you can prove. And I'm sure that has also kind of hurt.
Well, the consultants, they do all this audience research, and so they're giving us the information based on the feedback that they're getting from the audience. And let's face it, the habits have changed. Viewer habits are changing. Along came the internet. Well, I'll go all the way back. I'll start off with the late 80s, with the 80s. Along came the Weather Channel. Yeah. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal with the Weather Channel? It actually was a big deal because in the very early days, we would get about 4.5 minutes to do a weather strip. All right, 4.5 minutes? Are you kidding? What do you need 4.5 minutes for? Well, before the Weather Channel came along, we had to give an entire national weather discussion.
Oh, wow.
So we were talking about the cold front moving through the Rockies. Now, if the cold front was moving through the Rockies and, poofing out, maybe we wouldn't.
Yeah.
But if the cold front was moving through the Rockies and creating 3 feet of snow, in Denver and maybe severe weather across the plains, we would definitely talk about that because people have friends and relatives who live in different parts of the country. So we had to talk about the whole national weather discussion, which to me was kind of fun. Well, then the Weather Channel came along, and so then it was discovered that if people really want the national weather, they're going to go to the Weather Channel. So then the consultants came to us and they said, look, you don't need to be talking about the national weather anymore. Just talk about local weather. Okay, fair enough. And in addition to that, well, you don't need 4.5 minutes anymore either. So we're going to cut you down to 2. And so now we're doing 2 minutes of local weather. And, for me, it took some of the fun out of it.
Right.
It was fun to be able to do, this whole big, meteorological overview of everything. But look, you got to do what you got to do. You can't be putting out information and content that nobody cares about. So I get that. I don't have any hard feelings toward the consultants, but they definitely were the messenger, if you will, as to, sorry, but we're not in the 1980s anymore. Here's how you have to do weather now. And so then of course came along the internet. Mm-hmm. And people now are walking around with their laptops, or their desktop, and they can get news, weather, and sports, with a keyboard and a mouse. Now suddenly we have to figure out how do we get them back off their computer and back to the TV station. And then finally, here comes the smartphones. Right. So now everybody's getting news, weather, and sports in their shirt pocket. They're carrying it around in their shirt pocket. And yet again now, so every time one of these new technologies comes along, we're getting fewer and fewer viewers, on the mothership, if you will, because they're getting this information everywhere else but TV. And so, as a result, TV has been in decline. We have fewer and fewer viewers. And as a result, we're having to continually change, our workflow and the way we present, all of our information. And because of that, a lot of our attention now has been turned away from television and turned toward all the different social media platforms. And for me, I always tell people that these smartphones, they came along 10 years too late because I need reading glasses every time I look at my smartphone. And so I'm just not really very good, with this, pull my smartphone out and, post this or tap out text messages to that, and I just realized that this is not my strength, anymore. And it's time to maybe hand it off to the next generation of broadcasters and meteorologists who are really, really good at this. They grew up with this stuff in the crib, and I really, as I said, I cut my teeth on broadcasting and news, but I'm not a generational social media person. And so I just feel like we're going to be in better hands, with the next generation meteorologists that come along who are better equipped, to deal, with all this technology. Yeah.
So talking about, how the stations change, one thing that's not changed is your relationship with WBTV. Mm-hmm. Being in a market at a station for 30 plus years is pretty abnormal in broadcasting. And then having a sidekick in Al Conklin, who's been here almost as long as you have.
Right.
I mean, what's the dynamic with Al? I feel like you guys are brothers. I mean,
man. No, that's all. No, Al has been a thorn in my side for 20. No, I'm just kidding, Al. That's a joke. No, Al is a great guy. We are like brothers. There's no question about it. And Al brought some philosophies here when he got here in the early 90s, which we still use to this day, about how to hand off forecasts to each other and coordinate. And so we work, even though we don't see each other much, but, the handoffs and the coordination, we've always had a very good working relationship. And I've been really, really lucky because he could be a chief meteorologist in any market in this country. And to have him as my right-hand man has just been a total blessing.
And what's kept you here at WBTV in Charlotte?
Well, it's kind of like my first impression. I got here. It was a booming city. It was modern. It was halfway between, as I say, my two families. My family in Pittsburgh, Vicky down in Louisiana. I just love the location. It's the Sun Belt. I go out in January 15th, and I'm looking at blue sky and sunshine. You don't get that in Pittsburgh. You get 6 months of gray stratocumulus every day, and it's depressing. But yeah, you've got the mountains 90 minutes to your west. You've got the coastal resorts just 3 hours to your east. What's not to like? I wasn't worried about chasing the almighty dollar and trying to get to LA or New York. I wanted to have a good balance of, a standard of living that, I could give my family, but at the same time, not have to move them around and make those other sacrifices, and Charlotte really offered that. Yeah.
So here at WBTV, you've been working on two projects, one weather related with the radars. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And the other one that's something that's near and dear to you is adoption and helping kids be adopted into loving families. So care to talk a little bit about both of those projects?
I'll give you a quick on each. You've been involved with the radar. So for folks who pay attention to weather at all, around this area, they probably heard us whining and complaining about the radar hole that we are in, because when they modernized the Doppler radar system back in the mid-'90s, they took our radar away from Charlotte. And so we got lucky because we did end up getting a radar in Greenville-Spartanburg, which we originally weren't even supposed to have that. But Senator Hollings in South Carolina fought for that, and that helped at least cover, even the western portions of North Carolina. It didn't do the whole trick, but it helped. And then otherwise, the closest radar to us is Columbia and Raleigh. And again, those radars are far away. And they don't give us the low-level detail that we would like to see when it comes to these localized storms and the potential for tornadoes and things like that. And so thanks to you, too, you've been helping us with this, but we have been pressing hard to our local, state, and federal government officials to rethink that decision and build a better radar system here in the western portion of the Carolinas. In fact, we even got Donald Trump to sign legislation on that, although the legislation didn't actually get us very far. And so without getting into the weeds, they really didn't make any significant changes for us. So instead, we're now turning to the private industry, although we're trying to actually forge a public-private relationship where we still think local and state government can help us underwrite some of this project that we're doing, but we're hoping to put up a radar network here, Doppler radar network, maybe as early as late 2022, 2023, to fill that gap. And right now, it's looking good, that we'll be able to see this to the finish line. We have NC State in the loop now, and they're on board, and so we have a lot of heavy hitters now who I think are going to help get this across the finish line.
Much needed tornado that you covered in Harrisburg was as eye-opener. We need this around here.
Absolutely. This is an almost an F3 tornado that went through Harrisburg and the northeastern end of Charlotte. And it was like 9 miles from the terminal Doppler radar that we have here in Mecklenburg County, which didn't help. Apparently, they didn't issue a tornado warning, for it, and at least for that portion of the area. And that kind of made our case to say, well, look, I know we have this little radar here in Mecklenburg County, but how much did it help? Apparently, not much. Yeah.
Forever family.
Okay.
Big thing for you.
I was adopted. I was adopted as an infant. And, I have always felt like I'm the luckiest guy on earth. I had people looking out for me before I was born, including my birth mother. My birth mother knew that she was not going to be able to raise me. And her doctor ended up being a distant family relative of my immediate family. And he knew that my mom was having trouble having kids. And so he called her and said, look, I have a patient here who is going to be putting a baby up for adoption. And I know you're having trouble having kids. Do you want a baby? So it happened through a family connection. And of course, my mom was stuck on one kid, and we're Catholics, and Catholics got to have big families. So especially back then. And so my mom was yes. I think she said yes before she even hung up the phone and asked my dad. Wow. So, so I have nothing but just pure gratitude for all the people who helped me, and gave me all the opportunities that they gave me by making the sacrifices that they made. My birth mother, giving me up. I mean, that just can't be easy. I don't care what your circumstances are. And then my mom and my family taking me in, and raising me as their own. And now I want to pay it forward. And so we do a weekly series every Tuesday at 7, featuring a foster child who is waiting for their own chance at an adoption and a forever family and a forever home. And it's been great. 2 out of every 3 kids that we feature are getting matched with families. And oftentimes, when people find out they can't adopt that child, they say, well, who else is available? So there's even more children down the line who are getting adopted because of this. And it's easily the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
That's awesome. That's great. Eric,
Yeah.
you told us a little bit you're going to be doing some photography, videography when you retire. Please tell us you're going to continue staying here in the Carolinas. We'll still be able to see you around.
Absolutely. Right? We're not going anywhere. And so please stay in touch with my Facebook page. I'll keep my Twitter account going. And hopefully we can still have some fun interacting through those things.
Well, Eric, I appreciate your time. Great interview. We wish you all the best of luck. And thanks for hanging out with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Love what you guys are doing up in the foothills. You're taking good care of your folks up there. So keep it going, pal.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching the Carolina Weather Group, the special interview with Eric Thomas. You can still tweet him and well wishes for a happy retirement, and we appreciate you watching. We hope you have a great night.